All right. I'm going to address the the elephant in the room. Maybe because I'm a sci-fi writer, I'm thinking the alien in the room. But the elephant in the room is something that I posted about, and I want to, clarify. Not really clarify, because I didn't say anything wrong. So I'm doing this just to build on what I said earlier. And what I'm saying is straight up, I don't like when people refer to black sci-fi and Afrofuturism as aesthetic. I believe that all science fiction has aesthetics in it, no doubt. Cyberpunk, post-apocalypse, you're describing the picturesque elements of it, but black sci-fi, like all other forms of sci-fi, are not purely or dominantly aesthetic, okay? Now, people can argue me all the way down. It can be a compliment. I'm not even going to say saying black sci-fi is an aesthetical part of, if that's a word, of science fiction, meaning it's what makes sci-fi beautiful. All of that can be possible, but that's not the context in which I heard it used. I heard and read sci-fi is aesthetic, like other aspects of sci-fi are really problem solving. They're introducing ideas and concepts. They're probing things that we may go through. As Stephen Barnes says, it is answering the what ifs, the if this goes on, and all this other stuff that sci-fi does answer. But for black sci-fi to not be considered an element of sci-fi that does that, that's whack, that's trash, that's offensive. For me, it's an attempt to diss. Everybody else, mind you, y'all can take it however you want. I don't mind being different on this. Mind you, people can say the same thing to a variety of people and it won't offend everybody. It may only offend one or two people. To me, I'm picking up on the slide remark. Now, mind you, the other aspect is it may not be intentional, okay? It may be limited in their understanding of black sci-fi, and maybe they've read some of the black sci-fi that is more aesthetic and more dominant with, the picturesque elements of it, as opposed to the hardcore questions, science fiction questions that they're answering. Okay, maybe that's the case, but your ignorance is still ignorant. Whether you're familiar with all of the totality of black sci-fi or not, is if you're making an opinion or comment and it's not right or it's not well researched, then you're wrong. And same thing with my opinion. My opinion is based on what I know. And I'm saying, as a science fiction writer myself, our stories are no more aesthetic and no less aesthetic than mainstream sci-fi. I think the reason why I take offense to it is because, sure, we are dominant in our stories dealing with slavery, our stories dominant with preoccupation with race. No doubt, that's because we're victims of it. No doubt, we're going to have a lot of stories set in slavery. We're going to have a lot of stories where race is a dominant factor. No doubt. Now, in my stories, no, I don't have any of that, right? I barely have racial conflict because I barely have white characters in my stories. My villains happen to be black, right? So mine is really just a black on black conversation. But still in all, even if I was to write about race, even if I was to write about slavery, what the heck are we dealing with now? We are dealing with a world a society in America that doesn't know how to deal with race. So social science is a science. When we talk about Star Trek, yeah, they had the warp drive. Yes, they had the phasers. Yes, they had time travel, but they also had racial conflict. They had social science dominant questions all throughout Star Trek. And that's because how things affect you, how things affect society, are not just a robotics question. It's not just a threaten the planet question. It's how will the people behave from the robots? How will the people behave when the planet is threatened? How people behave is the beginning of a social science answer. So if black sci-fi deals with race in a strong manner, it may still be useful because it is addressing a social science question. Now, back to my problem with it being called aesthetics. That's just like saying the racial conflict is an aesthetical or a trivial or a side issue. And I hear people say that all the time. That's because, they're not the victims of it. They may be white people. Why are you always worried about that? The economy is a bigger issue. The war with, some Arab nation is a bigger issue. China is a bigger issue. Not to black people. Black people not only have those issues because they're American, but they also have the issues of race. You may not die from a Chinese invasion or an Arab nation invasion. You may die at your own hands of your own police. You may, from what Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee for, that is just relevant. Okay, you don't know what these sci-fi writers went through. I have a story where the robot police behave just like the police in America, and they racially profile. That is a futuristic story, and welcome to Boss Lady's Planet. But why did I think of it? Because again, I'm dealing with police in America. So yeah, mainstream writers might be fearful of a Terminator with a Skynet that is going to take over the world, violently if necessary. Why? Because the world and the culture that, mainstream writers, European, Western culture, we speak English, so with the culture that we come from was a very, very much like Skynet. Okay? They weren't loving and friendly and talk to you until you convert and reason with you. They were, get down or lay down. You understand? And many times they didn't even ask you. They tricked you into it. So yeah, that's why they project those values onto the robots. So for me, I'm not dying from my own greediness. I'm dying from my from the racism that plagues us. So I'm going to put that racism in my robots, in my dilemma. So there you have it. That's that. The other thing, and I'm going to give Kevin Grievous, the writer, comic book writer, and the writer for Underworld, the vampire werewolf series, credit for producing this little thought. Afrofuturism is not a term that was created in awareness of of literature and films and comic books. Afrofuturism was a term that came from Sun Ra and other jazz artists. Even before Janelle Monáe was called Afrofuturistic, there were other jazz artists that were considered Afrofuturists. And then there was sculptors, there were paintings, and there was other visual arts. So yeah, maybe because those were the arts that dominated and introduced the world to African American and African futuristic thoughts is why they call it aesthetics or consider it aesthetics. That's fine. I can understand that. You get a pass but your expiration date expired when Black Panther came out, because Black Panther and Killmonger's conversation was not aesthetical. That was a very valuable and needed conversation for the Black and African world, for the African diaspora to have that conversation. Now, mind you, every science fiction movie doesn't talk to everybody in the world. That the one that we're dealing with right now, with all of this Impossible Burger and all of these plant-based burgers, that is a Western world conversation. That movie Soylent Green, that dealt with what we might eat in the future, they're not worried about that in Africa. They're not worried about that in certain parts of South America where they have food and plenty of food. The reason why they may go hungry is because of the politics of the food management. The land can produce enough food for the people, but the global greedy countries, the China, the European nations, and the Arab nations that descend on Africa and put these policies where they can't eat and sell their own food to their neighboring country or to their own people, is what takes Africa out of the conversation. But believe me, when it comes to plant-based food, the pesticides and the poisonous processed foods that we eat here in the Western world is demonstrated in the horror futuristic film Soylent Green, is not a conversation that is of a concern to every nation on this planet. Now it might be because of how the policies are going, but other than that, it's not because of the natural environment. It's not because of overpopulation. Everybody ain't overpopulated like it is in the Western world, especially not like China. Good Lord. So anyway, an African person could call Soylent Green aesthetic. Well, that's still selfish, because the issue doesn't affect you, makes it superficial and background, and that's what aesthetic means, people. So no, I'm not going to give it even a pass just for that. I'm just going to say that they need to update the understanding of what black sci-fi is, Afrofuturism, African futurism, all of those different futurisms, right? None of them are aesthetic. Even, Asian futurism, which is demonstrated in the movie The Wandering Earth, that is not an aesthetic movie. So, I'm waiting for these people to realize I'm backing into my driveway. So anyway, that's it. And I just wanted to outline why I had a problem with people calling black sci-fi aesthetic, and that's the reason why. I don't believe that what we talk about in our books are superficial. What we deal with in our movies are background, concentrated on the appearance of different things, all of the things that aesthetics means. Maybe our music, our Afrofuturistic music, and maybe our Afrofuturistic sculptures and paintings and drawings are, but not our writing, not our comic books, and not our movies. All right, y'all. Peace. That's my 2 or 3 cents. It's only in my opinion. Mind you, are allowed to disagree. All right? But I ain't going to be wrong. You ain't going to be right. We just going to disagree.